So yes, I spent November of 2023, 16 days at St. Thomas of Torrent Town. That's St. Thomas of Torrent Town there. And it is in the video game Eco. Now, I'm not going to spend too much time explaining Eco, but really quickly, Eco is basically Lego with an economy and an ecology. And if you understand that, you pretty much understand Eco. There's a lot to that, but that will be enough to understand what was happening here. And St. Thomas functioned pretty much in any way that you could imagine a church might at St. Thomas or in Torrent Town. So I conducted evening worship nightly. It was Compline services, either from the BCP or a Book of England publication. We did after worship discussions about whatever the community wanted to talk about. Sometimes that was theological, sometimes it was about love and relationships, sometimes it was about morality, sometimes about politics, wherever the conversation went. I offered, people could offer alms to me, and I offered charity, so people could come and just sort of collect money. So in most ways, it pretty much was functioning sort of like a small church community. To make that a little more alive for you, and I'm going to have to change things a little bit here. I'm going to have to change my share to a different screen. But to make it more alive to you, I have a very short video that will put you in St. Thomas. So just give me a minute to make sure that I can navigate this since we're already having fun with technology. And I think I'll pause, stop share. Nope. Pause share, stop share. And back to Zoom. And that's a problem. Man, I'm sorry, guys. Why is my mouse gone? That's why. All right. Back to Zoom, back to Zoom. This is that focus thing, isn't it? I gotta get used to that. Screen share. Just capture. Share sound. Video. There we go. That's the last hiccup, I hope. And I don't know why I don't see it now. Is there a button to pick different windows, Richard? There it is. Boom. And we can play. All right. So this is my server tour. I swear this all worked every time I tested it. Boom. HDMI. There. It's not coming out the HDMI. Do you know how to make it come out the HDMI? Play all add. Nope. You know what I can do? I'm going to do something strange. I'm assuming, Samuel, that they're picking up the volume on Zoom, right? So if I play the video, Zoom will get it, and I will mute it on this end and just describe what's happening. And that will be a quick solution. All right? If there's a Zoom problem, let me know. Welcome to Eco. And you don't have pictures on this screen. I don't know why. Wow. Stop, stop. It's not demoralizing at all. Mirror? I'll get that to go away. Okay. Where's mirror? Wow, I was juggling two laptops, guys. Can I be heard? Good. So let's see St. Thomas.
Spawned in the beginning of the game has been here since the beginning of the server. This server tour is mainly to show you what's on the server. It's not really going to talk too much about game mechanics, but there you go. There's the church. Before we go to the church, if you look this way, all that building, those windmills you see there, or the wind turbines, etc., the lights, street lights, that's all city, and that was all spawned in the beginning of the game as well. So none of this was built really by players. I mean, it was built by players, but you spawned in. These are conveniences for players joining the server. And they do various things. There's homes here and whatnot, but we don't have to worry about it too much. This is the main city, however. It is not where most people are doing their playing, however. Now, behind me there's St. Thomas's Charity. This is just a distribution center. All this means is people can drop things they don't need in it, and people can come pick them up. That's all that there is to this. Nothing special about that. Fairly common in the game. St. Thomas. This way leads to a bridge that leads to the ocean, and I'll take a look there in a minute. So, first up, that's just a tour of the area the church is at. Now, underneath the church, i.e. that door there, leads to the kitchen and all the work that I do to run the various parts of the church. If we enter the church, in here we have the interior of the church. We have comments about it being a research study. We have a scripture passage on the wall. We have the pole that was used to help engage people on the server. Worship is conducted in this building primarily. These are storefronts right here and here. And they're basically the most important part of how gameplay works in this game. And there's a contract board. So the way this works, this storefront, the Fellowship, is just a restaurant. People can buy food from me and they can sell food from me. That makes me part of the economy. It makes me part of this community. And so that's absolutely essential. Everyone basically is doing that. They're buying and selling things that they can produce because of the type of work they do. Down here is an alms store, and this is a peculiar store. It is the same sort of thing. You can buy less things in it. You can see him selling bread and wine, but bread and wine is being sold at a really, really high price. The point of that is a donation. So someone comes here and they want to donate to the alms fund. They come and they buy this. There are nails being given away. That's kind of a bit of a joke, but I'm actually paying people to take nails. Not very many. And then there's a soup kitchen, which is food that's going bad that's sold for a really low price. If we come up here to this shop, once again, you'll notice that we have a Thanksgiving offering. That has bread and wine as well, out of stock right now, sold for a normal price, actually a really cheap price for bread and wine. Alright, contract board that Mr. Chill's at, that is the alms contract board. So that is basically where I just give away.
Video meant to say I had to stop it there because Mr. Chill interrupted me. But the money that's being given away there's no strings attached to that, right? There was no way for me to check why people were asking for money. It was just money people could come take. So theoretically, somebody could have come and emptied the alms account or something like that. Nobody ever did that, but it was a possibility. Something else that the video didn't mention is down by the water. From the first slide. Oh, we got to share screen again. Down by the water, so where the road went on the way to the ocean, I built another building called the Rectory, and it's where my character lived. But out of the Rectory, I also ran a small fishery called Zebedee and Sons. And that pretty much tells you, in large part, what was happening. That's weird. Well, I guess we're going to have to... Oh, now it works. Excellent. I don't know what to do with that thing there, but I'm going to give up now because I have definitely lost the tech battle. But anyway, So that gives you a window into what life in St. Thomas was like. There was a fishery, there was alms, there was charity being done, there was regular worship, there was after-church discussion, and that's really what the life of St. Thomas looked like. Why did I do this? I've got 4 things here, and that's why that won't go away. There we go. Why did I do this? Well, the basic research question is, how do video game players react to religion in a shared public cyberspace? And that's important for a bunch of reasons. The basic reason is that the video gaming industry is currently valued at $159 billion US. That was 2020 figures. Compare that to the movie industry, is only valued at $41.7 billion. So video games are massive. They're a massive cultural object, and they have a huge amount of influence because of that. And so we have to take them seriously. That's the first point. Second point is the subject of a lot of video game research. It's not the subject of my research, but it's important to acknowledge. Video gaming involves a great deal of interactive mythology. What I mean by that is, imagine you're watching a really good movie or reading a good book. You get immersed into it, right? And you enter into that space. But you kind of receive a story. And afterwards, you might reflect on that. But video gaming, same thing, you get immersive, but now you're a participant in that story. And it asks you to do a different sort of thing. And if I want, just to keep it really basic, the implications of this, video games involve participation in story, and something else that involves participation in story is liturgy. They're very close to each other. And given that video games use religious imagery regularly in a whole bunch of different capacities, it means that we really should be there on some level, because there's some analog there. And you don't want to have religion represented without, religion being there. So that's one reason why this is important. Well, that's the main reason why it's important. The other thing about the server is to keep in mind that it might not be what you expect it to be, right? The average ages of the people on this server were between 21 and 47. Most people between the ages like their late 20s, early 30s, a lot of different backgrounds. Both men and women were playing the game, and they were predominantly from the US, Canada, and a few players from Europe, but Anglophones was the most important part, that they spoke English. In terms of backgrounds too, right? We're talking people at home with an infant child sleeping in bed and they're playing a game, or people working in the IT sector. Some people were at home for sort of life circumstances. Either they had a bad injury that took them off of work for a while, and just young people playing games. So lots of different people playing on this server. Every time I do that, I have to re-click. That's okay. There we go. Another important part of this is Eco as a game has a complex ludology. Now, ludology just means the study of gameplay mechanics. And this is pretty important for understanding this project. And what I mean by that is, well, the church was running a small kitchen, right? If I'm going to play as a cook running a kitchen, I need someone to buy food from. So I need someone else being a hunter and a farmer and a fisherman. I ran the fishery, so that was easy. And then you need someone else also, if you want higher quality food, being the butcher or the miller, for grain and oil and things like that. Why do you need why is this important to this study? It meant that I was embedded in that community as part of the economy. I was a player that you couldn't just sort of pretend wasn't there. It'd be like sitting down to play a game of Monopoly, and one of the other players happens to be a church. Well, they're a church, but they're playing Monopoly with you. And you can't pretend they're not there. So it embedded me in the community in a different way than if there was a simple ludology. And that's really important to the nature of how this study played out. This is the last bit about the methodology, and this emerged later on. I didn't really realize this going into it. The server I was on is BlueTorrent Gaming. BlueTorrent Gaming is not owned by the company that runs Eco. It's a community project. It's owned by a few players that want to run an Eco server. They run it how they like. They have admins, and it's their server. It doesn't belong to a company. It belongs to the people that play the game. That's the first point. The second point is, you're trying to figure out what I was doing. St. Thomas wasn't a parish. It's not like there was a community on BlueTorrent Gaming asking for a priest to come in and lead worship. That didn't happen. And you might describe it a bit like a mission, but I wanted a reaction to people that people would have to religion generally, not to evangelical work or missionary work. So it's not quite what I was doing. The biggest analog is probably chaplaincy, because I was present in a space where other people were doing the thing they were doing, in this case, gaming. I was just sort of a presence there. And it's important from the perspective that I was a guest. I could have been kicked off, right? I had no authority on Blue Torrent Gaming. I was just like any other player. I was just playing in a different way than other people may have been playing. So what happened? Well, engagement was regular and in various forms. It was a lot more engagement than I anticipated. And I mean, pretty much in every capacity. I had regular people coming to worship. I had regular after-church discussions. I had donations of various kinds. There's a little bit of negative response, but not a whole lot. The alms kind of speaks for himself. I raised just shy of $5,000 in alms in the game. Now, these are blue dollars, they're not American dollars or something, but it's a significant chunk of change. That was probably more than my fishery raised, and that might have been enough. Well, cars and steam tractors and stuff would go for $350 to $700 in the game. So that's not small apples. That's a chunk of change. In terms of worship, there was an average of 2.3 congregants. Day 4 had the most with 5. Day 0 was none. Day 0 had people come in and sort of like they were stunned that someone was conducting worship in the church. So, and then, there were 16 days. So day 4, day 5, day 6 had the most. Near the end of the server, I only had maybe one person show up. But of course, there weren't many people on the server at the end. Sort of after American Thanksgiving, everything dropped off. So we still had people coming, just there wasn't many people playing the game at that point. In terms of things that were donated to me that were not simply money, this is the Bogland mission. Now, what's interesting, the Bogland mission is another player owned this land, and they built that building, not looking like that, but they built a building, and they decided they didn't need it anymore. And so they said to me, if you turn this into a chapel, I'll give it to you. So it was just donated to me, and so I built a chapel there. It's Bogland Mission. I don't really know how much engagement Bogland Mission got. People could donate there. People could gather there. Later on, I had candles in there, so you could see it at night with the candles in it. But that was the Bogland Mission. But almost everything was, or a number of things were donated. I mean, this here is Holy Trinity. I built this one. And actually, this reminds me of a note that I should have mentioned earlier. In my video, I said spawned in. What that means is those churches or things that were spawned in, those houses, those were built before the game started, so they didn't have to be built during the mechanics, and then people could buy it after the game started, right? So it was a convenience, it makes it easier. That first church was like that. I built it without having, so on day 0, I had a church, and I bought it as soon as the game started, like everyone else had to buy a house, about the same size. This one I actually had to build from scratch. So Holy Trinity is out in the desert, and that's where the economy went, so I followed the economy. That's where the other players were, I put it there. People could donate there, they could collect charity there. I conducted worship there once. And if you see the yellow bricks that make up the crosses on the building and the front of the building, those were donated. I didn't have to buy those. They just said, well, if you're building a church, here's some bricks. Use them up for me. This truck was donated, and this truck was donated by different players. I didn't have to buy my truck. Negative responses, there was some. This is Beat the Meat. It was set up kind of across the road from St. Thomas. Also ran a kitchen, and I mean, it was later in the game, so they're running a better kitchen than I was. I did talk to the owner of Beat the Meat. They said they were an atheist, and they didn't like religion in a public space. But they wouldn't really speak to me much past that, and it's probably important to note that their name was religiously charged as well, so there's probably more underneath that, but I couldn't really follow up on it too much. It's true that other players that were involved in church were a bit defensive about this, just a little bit, but this didn't escalate anymore. And what's important here is looking at the data, the owner of Beat the Meat bought fish from Zebedee and Sons, right? Like just because they were making a statement, they didn't stop playing with me, right? And as far as I could tell, looking cross-referencing the players that went to different kitchens, there was no evidence that people were boycotting me or anything, or if they were, it was really hard to find out who was. So there wasn't any negative gameplay reaction, just sort of a statement made by this. So in all of this, what kind of themes come out of this? What can I say? I mean, one of the major themes is a theme of authenticity and trying to figure out how authentic things were. This is a general chat log, so everyone could see this chat log, which is a conversation happening, and someone saw the church and they wanted to know what it was about. Dromakin, I answered, well, I built the church Dromakin. And then Corey Days says, it's about the people of the server. If y'all want to join the Discord, there will be discussions then. It's pretty important. Corey Days came to worship regularly. Corey Days also came to discussion afterwards. Corey is, I'm pretty sure, agnostic, if not atheist, but really interested. And you can see exactly what Corey is interested in there. Dromican says, for real though? Like, how does that work? And then Harvest asks the critical question. He's just role-playing, smiley face. Now, Harvest is interesting as well. Harvest never came to worship, never participated in after-church discussions, donated to the alms account almost every day. Almost every day, which is interesting by itself. But that raises the question, is this just all role-play? Is any of this real or authentic? Well, this is Richard's take on it. Richard is a admin on the server, and he is a Christian, and he came to worship regularly. And he was very concerned that people would be disruptive because he's an admin. He would have to kick people off if there was a problem, right? Possibly kick me off. And he says, no, I think people realize you weren't just playing around, and that's why worship was never disrupted, which is true. Nobody came in and disrupted worship. They could have in a whole bunch of ways. They could have entered the building and made a bunch of noise. They could have joined the Discord, harassed us in various ways, but everyone seemed to respect the worship time. And if they had a problem with worship, they would just leave until worship was over. But the authenticity piece sort of goes across various places. This is Bright Susan talking actually about Dromican. Dromican, who first asked the question, turns out he's a Christian. He did come to worship once, and he was uncomfortable with it or confused about it. And it makes sense. I mean, Bright Susan is an atheist. She was doing call and answer of the Psalms. And probably the majority of the congregation were either atheist or agnostic. There was only one Christian that came regularly and a handful of other Christians that came sometimes. And so there was a question, like, is this really worship? And that was a question that Dromican posed. And that's a question of that same authenticity piece. But it also goes through almost every aspect of the project. Phantom Scriptor, who did not come to worship, did not engage in discussion, did donate regularly, and that was their only engagement. Thought that the churches and the cathedrals added something. The buildings added something to the game, and they really valued it. And various players said they valued sort of the immersiveness of the theme, but you have Flowerwiz saying quite directly that this was just decoration. Because in Flowerwiz's mind, what was authentic, what mattered, was the discussions and perhaps the worship, although Flowerwiz didn't come to worship. What's a really interesting story related to this is Bright Susan, who did come to worship regularly, was doing her thing over at her home and got picked up by somebody else and driven to church for worship so they could worship in person rather than just on Discord. Which raises that question again. Well, what's real here and what isn't? Flowerwiz actually is pretty direct about this too. Flowerwiz did not think they really engaged at all. They thought the discussion piece, which they engaged with, would have happened with or without the project. They were actually thinking of having a gameplay interaction. They were going to work with me to offer Thanksgiving food for free on Thanksgiving. Never came through, but they weren't really sure that they engaged. And it has to be honest that a lot of players had this problem when I was debriefing, like closing interviews, asking them questions. They weren't sure if engagement meant just coming to worship or participating in the discussions or donating in alms. It was hard to figure out where that authenticity line starts and stops. Speaking about that, it's the same problem when asking about religion in games. I got various answers about this. Flowerwiz gave a really fulsome account of religion in games, and it's true. There's a lot of religious themes in games. The example here is Final Fantasy. These are a number of Japanese games that have this style where you start level 1 killing goblins, and at the end of the game, you're fighting God himself. Killing God's a very common motif in games, and Flowerwiz spoke about that. And some of the players mentioned video games using religion, such as Civilization does, or any RPG or strategy games where religion is something you can research that gives you certain effects. But Cypher thinks it's the first time he's ever encountered religion in the game. And the part of the thing here is not being able to tell if fictional religion or real religion is present, and not really sure where to put the emphasis on that question, right? So for Cypher, this was the first time they saw any religion in a game. And a few players said that, which I trust them. It's just that I see religion in almost every game. So it's hard to know what they're noticing and what they're not. I'm just gonna... oh, I want to go back. That's an important slide. Now the lion's blocking off. That's Frank Bossman who wrote this. He wrote a book called Gaming and the Divine, New Systematic Theology of Video Games. He's looking about the location where theology happens here. And Deus incognitus is a really important concept he brings up, which is sort of God hidden or God incognito. And his point is, if you're playing a video game and you've got a theological awareness and you know what might be happening in the symbols in the background, sure, there's a certain amount of richness to it then, right? You just carry that in. But if you don't know, which a number of the players don't have any religious background, it doesn't mean it doesn't show up, right? It might show up only in part or in places, but his point is that video games are a place for theological reflection, and God is kind of hidden or embedded in there, and sometimes you encounter God's revelation through video games. And I think you see that kind of in this authenticity question, trying to figure out where authentic is. You also see it where players start finding something authentic. So I guess the related question to this is, why do people engage? What? First of all, why did they start engaging and why do they keep engaging? And the first point, Richard says clearly again here, some of it was out of curiosity. Everybody actually said it was about curiosity. Curiosity about religion, curiosity about the
All the nice
project,
stuff.
to some extent, desire to be sort of helpful and also collaborate on this. Richard points out that he really valued the fact there
Sorry?
was atheists, Christians, pagans present and engaging in these conversations.
The machine?
But
Hello.
the other aspect of this
But
curiosity piece that we have to also
the
take seriously
colors and
is a game.
Each color is
People
40,
are playing, and
47.89
that has
plus
a very
tax,
strong
and
reality
the
to it. So this is a
black
general
is because it's
chat.
big,
I
77.
hear sound on my end. I'm not sure.
Less.
This is a general chat conversation again that's just sort of playful here. But Harvest says, "Blessed be thy pineapples," and I say, "All ye pineapples and taro, bless ye the Lord." And Middleman says, "Get your gold bars at the Mineral Mart on the way to church." People are playing. And if we're taking playing seriously and video games seriously, we should at least look at Bartle's taxonomy, because this can sort of make a long conversation to a short conversation. Bartle did a bunch of research on why video gamers play games. And this is still used in a lot of video game research generally, and also a lot in designing games. And it's not just straightforward. People don't play games for one reason. And he mapped them on these two axes: acting or interacting, players in the world. And killers are the people that are sort of acting on other players. They want to win. They're the competitive players. They're trying to win the game. But the whole bottom part of this table is really relevant to this study, because if you're interacting with other players, you're a bit of a socializer. You want to find new ways to interact with other players. And this church project, St. Thomas, provided exactly that. The interaction between players, something you can explore there. It was also a new part of the world. So if you're interacting with the world, if you're an explorer and you want to see what can happen, this is another place to engage with that. And so if we're taking playing seriously, we have to remember that's part of the reason why people will be there and explore and be investigative in the first place. And when they're investigating things, they found different things. So Cypher, who was really interested in the social aspect of this, really hit on something. He really valued the social aspect, and he noticed the social aspect was missing in games. He had something to say about the dopamine drip and the addictive quality of games, and the fact that people aren't really playing for the other players. And he deeply valued this as a moment to escape that kind of cycle. Phantom Scripter is also very interesting as well, because Phantom Scripter, if you ask them about other players, they didn't know. They didn't really know what other players are doing at the church. They didn't pay any attention to that. But they regularly donated to the church. Why? And they said because they were raised with a strong sense of empathy. And so donating, digital donations, gave them a chance to exercise that, which is, I mean, that's a whole piece by itself too that's worth mentioning. Another player who came to worship regularly, I asked them why they didn't donate, and they said, well, no one's starving in Eco, right? But people found found things in different places in the game. Certain parts of the project became important to them. Right, Susan, who came to worship quite regularly, found it soothing. We also had a good relationship, so she was sort of there partly because I was there. But she also found the space safe. And so it was a safe, soothing space that she would come to while she was playing the game, and she valued that part of it. And Corey Days, who I've already mentioned, was really interested in the social aspect of this. So this question he's responding to here actually is, how has this impacted your view of religion in games, was the question. he said, well, it made me more open to the idea of actually having it around because of the whole atmosphere and experience that it brings to the game. So hostility. That I expected to be a major theme. It's a theme. It certainly is. It's not really as present as I thought it would be. Cypher sort of phrases the main anxiety about the hostility, I think, which is Cypher thought the majority of players just sort of ignored it or didn't even know it existed. And the data doesn't really bear that out. It's hard to say with certainty. I know 400 people logged onto the server. I don't know how many players of that 400 stayed to play on the server. I know 65 different players came into the church and bought something at the church. I don't know how many of them came to the church, looked around, and left, right? I know that of that 65, 25 players did something more. They came to worship, they donated more regularly, they engaged in conversation, they were more seriously engaged in some way or another. And it's quite a lot more engagement than I necessarily expected. So it's hard to say, and Cypher acknowledges this. Cypher acknowledges that $5,000 in the Alm account would imply that there was considerable engagement. In terms of hostility like this, there was 3 examples of this. There was Beat the Meat, there was this big cross set up beside me. I put a cross up that could be vandalized, and it was flipped over upside down. It took a while, it took about 3 days to vandalize it. But these things didn't translate into any hostility past them. They were kind of statements, and that was that. The player who built this shopped regularly at the church restaurant for food early on in the game, for example. Beat the Meat, bought from the fisheries, right? There was no real sign of anything past. I just have a point to make. If I ask people about the motivations behind the hostility, Corey Days had some of the most direct, I'll say, to he would describe it as fiery or passionate hostility. And Corey Days said it was basically because the people he spoke to were sure that I was trying to convert him. And Corey Days knew that wasn't the experience, didn't feel like he was trying to be converted, but that was the feeling of the people that he knew that didn't like the project. Bright Susan mentioned a few players that associated with bad stuff. So it was very personal. They had a personal experience in life that made them not like the church. But it didn't translate to anything past that, as in they didn't have any trouble with the church being on the server. They didn't have any trouble with people going to worship. They just sort of didn't want to engage. And they engaged very little bit. Some of these players actually did talk to me and stuff, but didn't really engage past that. And those are types of hostility we could probably anticipate. If you ask people, did they find the experience hostile? No, right? Richard was probably the most obvious to ask about this because he was an admin and he had to manage this kind of hostility. And his statement was, well, I guess it kind of restored my faith in humanity, right? Because there wasn't much for him to do, which impressed him. Cypher, when asked if he thought it changed the identity of the server, said, I think it's an amazing thing that they decided to let St. Thomas exist inside of a video game. And he's, like I said, well, actually, he's an atheist, I believe, maybe agnostic, had some Buddhist background. The immersion point about chaplaincy is really important. If we look at any of these hostility pieces, part of it is that I had no power on the server. I was just present, right? One of the examples of this is the admin, Richard in this case, came to donate at the church, and another player asked him, oh, why are you donating? Because as an admin, you're kind of a symbol of government. But because I had no authority, like I was just a church, just another player, I could be banned. I was playing the game by the same rules everyone else was. There was no pressure in that way. And so I think any of this type of hostility, making a point or concern about conversion or any of this stuff, I think it didn't go any further because there was really nowhere else to go with it. So what can I say about this experience? Well, it changed the way I play this game. I'm not sure if I'll ever play this game the same way again. I'm not sure I'll impact other games. And I think that related to this Deus Incognitus stuff, where you encounter God in places you don't realize you're encountering him. So that's the first thing off the top. If I'm answering the question, how do players interact with religion in a gaming space? They made space for it. They played with it. They participated with it more than I expected, which was an interesting point as well. This study was meant to cause more questions, and I think it has. I think it should. I think there's questions here about how this translates to real-world environments. These are a question about how well we can be received by just being present where other people are doing whatever they do. There's questions here about what would happen longer term if in-game video gaming chaplaincy or something was run and how that would be received. And there's long lurking questions about authenticity, and if really that authenticity question is mostly about finding a ground and a place for theology to happen, rather than trying to figure out whether or not what's going on is authentic. But I'll leave that for you. I want to thank a number of people, and I really have to start this by thanking Blue Torrent Gaming themselves. They made this possible. They let me on their server into their space, and I owe them a great debt of gratitude. I thank my consultants, Dr. David Dean, John Rickerson, if he's here. Ed Trevor's helped me out in the beginning. I thank him as well. And I also thank my grad class and Dr. Jody Clark and Dave Sinnis for supporting this kind of crazy idea. It was an adventure. And thank you all for coming. I'll leave that up.
Blane, thank you. Because of the technical glitch, we're in a really tight time frame. So, but I do want to entertain a couple of questions. I think it's important for us to do. Dave, do you have a thought? Okay, so we're gonna entertain a couple of questions, and then I'm just gonna invite you to stretch for a second, and then we're gonna go right into our final presentation, which will be in part online. So, Dave.
All right, I wanted to jump at this because this is from our illustrious president, Dr. Heather McCants, who was watching online. She says, this is fascinating. I'm wondering about the relationship, if any, between worship and community in this space. I know that online community can be real community and online worship can be real worship, but I'm not sure how those work in a gaming context where people aren't necessarily intentionally being themselves.
I mean, yeah, I mean, the authenticity piece about people being themselves or not in games is almost, I would say, almost unfruitful to explore sometimes, because people in these places are sometimes more themselves there than they are wherever they are in life. So asking if they're being themselves or not is I don't even know where to go with that. It's in some ways they're exposing themselves, in some ways you can't see them either. I mean, here's an interesting piece of data related to that. When I did the debriefing interviews, one person interviewed me on Zoom with a camera. Everyone else opted for no cameras. Right? So I don't know how far I'd go down that line of questioning. I would say that people at worship, like for example, Bright Susan came to worship because it was soothing and calming. And that relationship between worship and after church discussion was a pretty direct link. It was partly because of those discussions that I offered a sermon on the Wednesday, not because there was an ask for a sermon, but because that sort of naturally came out of this.
And my question, you mentioned, I think that predominantly the worship people that came were agnostic and atheist-ish.
Yeah, as far as I can tell.
Did you get a sense from your research that this was a place where they could be curious and slightly anonymous? Like they might be curious about going to church, but wouldn't in person go to a church, but this was a way for them to engage in that without having to, in real life, walk in a door.
One player directly said that they would never go to a church in real life. And several players implied that this was a place to explore without having to worry about that. So yeah, absolutely. No doubt. Yeah.
Daniel Driver, I teach Old Testament. I don't really game, but I have two questions that are really about method. One is the research ethics of this seem to me sort of different from any other project I've ever heard of, in that are people providing their own sort of names? Or in other words, how do you establish, most of the other projects I've seen, there's a lot of care that's given to anonymize the people, and you might have to do just the opposite in some sense as part of your research. So how is research ethics different? Also, because of the way the gaming aspect works, it seems like you have actually quantitative data as well as qualitative data. And I'm just curious how this is different from the usual grad project in terms of method, research ethics, maybe other aspects that as you processed it.
Yeah, research method was hard to navigate with this, probably best described as a case study using ethnographic methodology, but it's not quite ethnography because I was purposely disturbing a community. I wasn't trying to observe a community, which is different. the anonymous thing happens in layers. The players have their own gamer tags that they chose, to which I scramble the gamer tags again. I did leave some continuity, but it would be hard to figure it out between the gamer tags as they appear here and they actually did in game. Partly because sometimes there's a message contained in that name that might be important. But there's like 3 layers of anonymous happening here. Really, the only way you would know who any of these people were was if you were on the server, and that's the only sort of thing. I can only hide so much about that, So, but in terms of quantitative data, yeah, there's a lot of qualitative data or quantitative data. I had like all of the data about who came to the shop and what they bought. I mean, I should have said this in the story, but an interesting part of this is that people would sometimes go in and they would buy 1 bread and then pause and then buy 1 wine. There were 2 transactions when there only had to be 1. So I could see things like that because of the way the data was.
Hey, it's Sadie. Keeping in alignment the themes of all the presentations so far today, do you think that this platform for ministry or chaplain could be a possibility for churches that are dissolving, for people looking for place of prayer, for international students? Do you think this could be something outside of experimental play?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a lot of potential for sure for growth in this space. And it's the international aspect of it is very clear. I mean, European players, the only limitation on that server was language, right? And there were some players that I knew couldn't speak English very well enough to play the game. So, yeah, I'll wait for Jody to tell me to stop answering questions.
Julie Pauling, first year MDiv program. Blane, really found this fascinating. My question to you is, how did this project impact your theology?
I think mostly it made me much more aware that God is working even when you don't realize he is. Like, that's the main thing that happened. Aside from that, yeah, I actually also think it impacted a question of authenticity in playing games, where like now I carry more of these questions with me whenever I play a game because I am participating in the story. So. Sorry about all the tech problems, guys. Thank you for staying through with me. This was very unusual for the tech.
Transition. Can we go? But we can all stay here and go on. We don't have to go to our laptops. We can stay here. We have to go to our laptops. Stay here. Okay, cool. Just checking okay. So anyway, thank you so much for your patience during the technical pieces that you were working with. Thank you for staying here. Things just fall apart. As long as everyone stays alive, that's all I'm worried about at this point. Okay. So thank you so much. Daniel's question was a great series of questions because that's exactly what we did through this whole process. When Blane first came with this, we said, like, how do we do exactly that? How do we maintain anonymity? What's the methodology that we can use using qualitative research? And you're right, it became a bit of a hybrid, but we felt that it was a really important piece of research. And we really appreciate Blane's creativity and fortitude in just pushing it through and saying what happens in a game if we go into the marketplace and set ourselves up. And I think unequivocally, we have a sense of relationship, curiosity, and openness, which is the spirit of what we've seen throughout our entire day today. So Blane, thank you for persevering, not only with this project, but today. Well done.